first of all to say this meeting is being recorded. So yeah, I would like to wish a very, very good day to all of you. And we are very happy to welcome you to our session, Approaching Schistosomiasis Elimination from Mass Treatment to Targeted Intervention, which to my knowledge is the first pre-meeting session ahead of the annual CORE NTD meeting. So therefore, again, a very warm welcome. And before I introduce today's session flow and the speakers, and then also hand over to my colleagues and co-moderators, that would be Chelsea Toledo from CORE NTD and David Rollinson from the Global Schistosomiasis Alliance, we would like to ask you if you want to participate right now in a poll, which Chelsea will now put up. And in this poll, we would like to know from you where you're based and what your professional background is. So please go ahead and just press which country, which continent you're on, so that we know. Seems Europe is leading. Wow, the Americans got up early. Africa is with us, Asia is with us, Australia is with us. Good to see. And yeah, I think Chelsea's, I don't know, Chelsea, you're going to show the polling just in a few minutes when more people might have entered, right? Okay, so next poll is area of work and progress. So are you Schisto guys, or where else do you work? Interesting, but definitely Schisto is leading so far as I can see. Again, Chelsea will show the results later on. And finally, what is your main area of research? No, sorry, that was the last one. So would you consider yourself a program manager, a disease modeler, epidemiologist? Go on with that, please. Many people from the field. Again, results will be shown later. And I thank you for your participation in that poll, but of course, stay tuned. With this, for now, I would like to hand over to Chelsea, the co-director of the CORE NTD Secretariat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to this first pre-meeting ahead of our annual meeting of the Coalition for Operational Research on Neglected Tropical Diseases, or CORE NTD. I would like to give a brief overview of what CORE NTD is and how today's meeting fits into the bigger picture. Before I do so, I wanted to give a big thank you to GSA, along with all the speakers, panelists, and rapporteurs here today for their incredible work to organize this event. The thoughtfulness and attention to detail I've seen from this particular group is truly remarkable, so you're all in for a treat today. So for those of you who are new to this space, CORE NTD is a group of researchers, program implementers, and their in-country partners with the shared goal of optimizing NTD control and elimination. Its secretariat is the Neglected Tropical Diseases Support Center, which is funded at the Task Force for Global Health, primarily by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, through its Neglected Tropical Diseases Program, and with UK aid from the British people. CORE NTD meets annually in conjunction with the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, or ASTMH meeting. The purpose of the CORE NTD meeting is to identify knowledge gaps and next steps for operational research on NTDs. This year, like ASTMH, we had to make the difficult decision to move our meeting to a virtual space. While meeting with our partners is our favorite time of the year, we're trying to make the most of this new virtual life and adapt our meeting accordingly. So one of the silver linings of going virtual is that we are not as constrained as we would normally be by time and space. Therefore, we are able to have greater representation of both content and partners, and to allow conversations to build upon one another leading up to and during the meeting in November. And that's what brings us here today. Today's session represents one of 3 sessions on the monitoring and evaluation framework for schistosomiasis. After today's session, we will host 2 more covering other aspects of this topic. Then, at CORE NTD in November, the 3 groups will come together to have a joint meeting and discussion. So while this is a bit of an experiment, we expect that the outcome will be an even more developed operational research agenda for schistosomiasis than we've already seen from this impressive group. We're excited to pilot this experiment beginning today, and thank you all for being a part of it. With that, I'll hand it back to Steffi.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chelsea. So as you have heard, we are the guinea pigs. This is the first pre-meeting session of CORE NTD. We're excited. We will see how it goes. And with this, I hand over to David Rollinson, the Director of the Global Schistosomiasis Alliance.
Thank you very much, Steffi and Chelsea, and a really warm welcome to everyone on behalf of the GSA. We are truly delighted to be joining with CORE NTD for this important session. And really, you're in for a treat over the next couple of months because this is the first of 3 pre-meeting sessions, all looking very closely at the operational research needs for schistosomiasis. And I think, as we all know, as we move forward with the new WHO roadmap, the stage really is set to embark on a 10-year program to achieve elimination of schistosomiasis. And this long-term goal of elimination includes elimination of the public health problem in all countries and interruption of transmissions probably in around 20 countries. So we have a job to do, and to achieve these targets, we do really need to identify the operational research questions, the key actions, the resource challenges, and the partnership opportunities that will drive the program forward. It's great to see so many Schisto people on the call and others. I think we're well over 100 now, because we really are going to need everybody to take this further forward. GSA has a number of working groups. Many of you will already be involved in those, and we're delving deeper into key areas relating to schistosomiasis. And today we welcome everyone to contribute ideas and thoughts. Don't hold back. Ideas and thoughts concerning elimination. And today we particularly want to probe how we might move from mass treatments to targeted interventions. So thank you very much, everybody. I'll talk to you later, and back to Steffi.
Yeah, thanks, David. Absolutely, how we might move from mass treatment to targeted interventions. So before I'm going on and going to introduce you to the speakers, I was just wondering, Chelsea, do we have the results of the polls? Okay, so I hope everybody can see those. If not, I'm going to briefly tell you what we see. So we see that those who were early and could participate in the polls showed us that many of those were from Europe, and the other then followed by Africa. We are now with the second poll, so clearly we are mostly Schisto and NTD people, but there's also people working on a broader level in public health and others. And the third poll is showing us, coming up, that the field epidemiologists are leading, and followed by the program managers, disease modelers, lab scientists, and others. So yeah, thanks, Chelsea, for the polls. And now we are jumping into the introduction of the speakers, I hope. Just going on. So these faces that you see might be familiar to you or not. So the first one we see is Dr. Sultani Matendechero from the department, or he's actually the head of the division of vector-borne and neglected tropical diseases at the Ministry of Health in Kenya. Then we've got our dear Dr. Yves-Nathan Tian Bi from the University of Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. We have Dr. Federica Giardina from Erasmus MC in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And we've got Dr. Bonnie Webster from the Natural History Museum in London, United Kingdom. So just introducing you a little bit into what we are going to do and how this session flow is going to be. So in our first remaining 45 hours of the first hour, we will hear the 4 talks of the 4 speakers. All of them will be focusing on tools and strategies for schistosomiasis elimination from different aspects. If you, as a general audience, have questions to the speakers, please put them into the chat, and we hope we will have the time to address them, or at least a few of them, to the speakers after their 4 talks. In the second part of the session, so in the second hour, we will go into breakout rooms. There are 3 breakout rooms. Group 1 will be focusing on interventions beyond MDA for reaching interruption of transmission. Group 2 is focusing on modeling for targeted interventions to reach schistosomiasis elimination. And Group 3 is focusing on diagnostics. We have a need for reaching schistosomiasis. These groups will be organized in that each of them has a chair, a rapporteur, and 10 panelists, or up to 10 panelists, that will be actively engaged in the discussion. So you as a general audience, if you're not the panelists or the chairs, you will be randomly assigned to one of the groups, and then you will have the chance to participate via the chat function, and also we will have a final voting for operational research questions at the very end, but we will explain this to you once we get to the discussion groups. After these discussion groups, we will meet again all together in a plenary as we are now, and the chairs of the discussion groups will present the key operational research questions they identified in their group. Yeah, and now stay tuned for the talks. The first one we have is from Dr. Sultani Matendechero. And yeah, Sultani will introduce us, or you, into the breaking transmission strategy from Kenya against NTDs. And Sultani, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Steffi, and thank you very much, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. So for the next 8 or so minutes, I'll just give you a very brief sneak peek into our breaking transmission strategy, which is actually our tool that we are using to move towards elimination of schistosomiasis and other NTDs. Next slide, please. So just quickly, this is just the journey that we have undertaken as a country with regard to our efforts to control schistosomiasis. We started mass treatment in 2012. This was conducted as a school-based deworming activity, where only school-going children were targeted. But what we discovered is that as an NTD program, we actually want to reach all the school-age children. And when we looked at the coverage, it was quite low. And we have progressively, graduated into a strategy that involves multiple platforms, that is churches, health facilities, marketplaces, in addition to schools. And last year, we piloted the first mass drug administration on this kind of multiple platform. And we were able to also expand to other age groups, that is the adults. And we actually experienced or returned a very high coverage. Now, we also discovered that unlike what we had expected, there was a very significant reduction in the implementation cost. Next slide. Okay, so some of the things that encouraged us to move to the breaking transmission strategy approach, there is quite a bit of reasons. But some of the ones that stick out is that we had quite a bit of data management challenges. We are still trying to address some of them with WHO to date. We also had a very weak coordination framework, and we had a lot of haphazard implementation across the country. There was minimal integration with very many players, implementing independently. And then, of course, one of our biggest problems was that we had insufficient mapping. And so we had a situation where we were treating in areas where we don't need treatment at all, where there is no schistosomiasis. And on the other hand, on the flip side, there are areas where there's schistosomiasis, but we were not treating because of this faulty mapping information. Next slide. So the most important reason that actually made us move into the BTS model was around the kind of picture that we were able to see when we monitored our impact, the impact of this school-based deworming model. We discovered that the medicines were very effective because immediately after the MDA, we would see a massive reduction in the prevalence and intensity of disease. But then by the time we would go back for the second round, we would see a bounce back to almost the same place we were the previous year. And this continued for almost 6 to 7 years until we now brought in the breaking transmission strategy. And the indication was that we were going to have this picture for the rest of our lives, and we would never achieve our goal if this was to continue. So we decided to look at why we were having this bounce back. And the next slide, if you can just take us to the next slide, please. we discovered that there were three main things that we needed to address. Number one, we needed to increase the coverage of the MDA. Number one, across the age group so that we reach many more school-age children. But then we also needed to expand it to other age groups, especially adults and even the preschool-age children. The other pillar is around behavior change communication, because we discovered that a lot of the disease prevalence is driven by behavior. And then the third one is around, expanding WASH interventions within the community. These are the three main approaches in the BTS, but there are others, like, for example, we are looking at snail control. We are looking at having not just one campaign per year. We want to have multiple campaigns, and we want to step up case management. Now, we believe that if we are able to, successfully implement this strategy, then we will be able to get to a point where we will reduce schistosomiasis to a point that we can confidently stop MDA without being worried that there's going to be a bounce back. Next slide, please. So this is what we are looking at. If we expand coverage, we are going to have a situation where the bounce backs are going to be tapered down. And in a period of about 6 years, you can see the red arrow, we will have gotten to that point where we are below 1% and transmission is not going to be as much as we have. The point that we call elimination of morbidity. Well, let's go to the next slide. Now, when we couple coverage with the behavior change communication, we expect that the impact is going to be even better, and we will be able to achieve our goal in just 5 years. Next slide. Now, the same is going to be seen if we couple coverage with the WASH. This is a model that we are working with. If we couple coverage with WASH, then we will be able to see our target being reached in just about 5 years, down from 6. I think someone is moving the arrow. It's supposed to be at 2023. Next slide. Now, what happens if we couple the three major interventions? We will actually see a much more significant impact, and we are even seeing a situation where we might be able to reach our objective within 4 years. But the thing that I want us to look at here is that at the end of the day, by year 6, we will have a sufficient WASH coverage and BCC coverage, and that signifies the sustainability that we are talking about, which will make us confident to stop MDA. Next slide. So in conclusion, I would just like to say, if elimination of schistosomiasis is what we want to achieve, then breaking transmission strategy is the way to go. Because you'll realize that for us, we want to be able to do this, and we are very clear in our mind that we want to be able to eliminate schistosomiasis where it can be eliminated. And so since we launched our strategy in last year on February 14th, we have actually integrated the approach to include not just schisto, but STH, lymphatic filariasis, and trachoma, because these are WASH-based NTDs. And then we have already piloted in 16 sub-counties with a lot of phenomenal success. Now this year, although we have had the hiccup of COVID, we were actually planning to scale up to 90 sub-counties across about 16 counties. And then next year, we scale up to all the 168 sub-counties. Now, I'm talking about the counties that either have schisto and STH, or STH, because we usually co-implement the two. Now, the point that I'm talking about here is that we actually have a clear path. With the BTS, we have a clear path to elimination of schistosomiasis and even other NTDs. And that one, we can be able to pursue it. And definitely, in conclusion, there is a big opportunity for research where we can be able to compare this strategy and other strategies that we have been implementing. So thank you very much. Steffi, I was trying to save you 1 or 2 minutes. I think I've successfully done that. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for saving, and thanks for a very, very nice and to the point talk. with this, we go immediately to the next speaker, so keep your questions, and we will hand over to Dr. Yves-Nathan Tian Bi from Côte d'Ivoire, from the Université d'Abidjan. And Nathan, if I'm correct, you wanted to use your own slides. So I'm stopping to share screen now.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Steffi. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this meeting. As far as I'm concerned, my presentation concerns experiences and lessons learned from chemical snail control as complementary measure to MDA for interrupting seasonal schistosomiasis transmission. So this is a SCOR cluster randomized trial with 4 intervention arms in which MDA and monocycidine is compared with the 3 others in which only MDA was used. And in relation to the MD, the hypothesis of this study was that MDA timed with chemical snail control with niclosamide would be the best measure for eliminating urogenital schistosomiasis transmission. And the study was carried out in northern and central Côte d'Ivoire, where 16 villages were randomly selected for snail study and snail control. In both regions, we note a high deficit in water and a sedentary cattle breeding with endemicity in urogenital schistosomiasis due to Schistosoma hematobium. There are many kinds of water bodies with their use, from lake of dam to pond. And there we can find as intermediate hosts Pilunus truncatus and Pilunus globosus. And in the north of the country, Pilunus truncatus is the major intermediate snail, while both snails are involved in the transmission in the central part. We also note that there is a strong pattern of seasonality in the abundance of infected snails. According to this background, in addition to schistosoma, the presence of Schistosoma hematobium, we expected to find Schistosoma bovis and Schistosome hybrids. As method, we first met the villagers to explain the objective, advantages, and risks related to the study. And over 3 years, an annual MDA with praziquantel and albendazole were applied before the peak transmission season. This was coupled with 3 times per year snail study and chemical snail control using niclosamide. So snails were collected in water contact sites selected, and in the laboratory, these snails were tested for the infection with schistosome, and with schistosome recovery were molecularly identified. In the field, sites with the presence of snails were treated with niclosamide, as you see on these pictures. And as a result, we found that MDA combined with chemical snail control seem more very efficient in terms of the reduction of infected snail numbers, and especially in the central part of the country. And here we see the evolution of the prevalence of infection in humans. Here we just take an example of the evolution from the baseline survey to the first year follow-up. And here again, we have the intensity of infection over the same period. And we note that there was a good reduction in prevalence and intensity in all intervention arms, with a strong decrease in arms 3 and 4. So as experience and lesson learned, we note that Schistosoma bovis is abundantly present in the north of Côte d'Ivoire, while Schistosoma hematobium and the hybrids are predominant in the central part. And characterizing the habitat, we noted that Belinus truncatus, both Belinus truncatus and Belinus globosus, can be found in the north, contrary to what we thought before, as observed in the central part of Côte d'Ivoire. We also found abundantly Belinus forscali in almost all the surveyed sites, although no individual were found infected. As lessons, the study was welcome in almost all of the studies villages, and mollusciciding significantly reduced the snail abundance in most cases. But this raised the question of treatment frequency, as we noted recolonization of habitat by snails. We also face some challenges, such as to find the maximum of all the water contact sites in a setting, to determine the distances to water points frequented by humans to be really considered, and also to treat large water bodies. Thank you. This is what I can share with you at this time. Thank you.
Big thanks to Nathan also for sticking to time and for introducing us into the topic of snail control as additional measure to mass drug administration. Again, please put your questions to Nathan into the chat, and we are now moving on to Federica, Dr. Federica Giardina from Erasmus MC. Also, I think, Federica, you wanted to share your slides. Am I correct?
Yes. Can you all hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm going to share my screen right now. Can you all see the slides? Yes?
We can.
Okay,
yeah.
So thanks, Steffi. Hey, hi everyone. It's great to be speaking here at this COR NTD pre-meetings on schistosomiasis elimination. For this opportunity, I would like to thank Steffi, Knopp, and Saka de Blas and of course the Global Schistosomiasis Alliance for organizing this session. I work as a research fellow at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, and I'm also part of the NTD modeling consortium. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the financial support provided by the European Commission through the Marie Curie actions. So my brief talk is going to be about schistomodeling, and I will mention some of the work we have been doing at Erasmus MC, but mostly my aim with this talk is to give an overview of the challenges we face when it comes to modeling schistosomiasis elimination, and kind of set the scene for the modeling discussion session that will take place right after the next talk on the diagnostics. So the 2030 goal set by WHO for schistosomiasis is elimination as a public health problem. As you probably all know already by now, it's defined as less than 1% prevalence of heavy intensity infections. And the treatment recommendations, so praziquantel administration and frequency, is based on the prevalence of infection in school-age children. However, the target population for treatment is not only school-age children, but also includes adults considered to be at risk in endemic areas, as well as even entire communities living in highly endemic areas. So some regions have already met the elimination of public health problem as a public health problem for schistosomiasis, and they are now ready to move beyond it towards elimination meant as interruption of transmission. So how can mathematical modeling support the elimination of schistosomiasis? So first of all, many insights and advances in NTD's management and control have come from modeling. And when I talk about modeling, I mean both statistical models that have been used, for example, to estimate the disease burden, such as Spatial, and but also mathematical models that are used to better understand the transmission dynamics of the parasite and simulate the effect of intervention over time. Now, traditionally, these mathematical models used have been deterministic models, but most recently, the attention has shifted towards stochastic models, and particularly individual-based models, which are really the only ones that can enable you to include all the different sources of heterogeneity, especially when it comes to modeling schistosomiasis elimination and really estimate the probability of elimination in certain settings. And WormSim is an example of individual-based model, and that's a modeling platform that has been used for years, developed at Erasmus MC to model the transmission and control of NTDs like lymphatic filariasis, onchocerciasis, and solid transmitted elements, and is currently being extended to include schistosomiasis as well. And in all models, assumptions do matter, but especially so when you're trying to model elimination. And most of these assumptions that we can use for schistosomiasis are actually informed by data that have been, that were collected maybe long time ago, or perhaps that relate to very high endemicity settings, not settings that are approaching elimination. But the data collection, of course, models do benefit from data collection, but they can also inform the design of epidemiological studies that aim at collecting new data. And there has been a recent collection of papers by the NTD Modeling Consortium that provide some insights on data needs for 7 different NTDs. So one issue where I think there has been quite a lot of progress on recently is the issue of spatial heterogeneity. So we all know that schistosomiasis is actually characterized by high focality, and we really need to have information at the finer geographical scale. But many countries have been, many countries have been reporting prevalence data at the sub-district level. And also the guidelines for treatment have now been updated to take into account this heterogeneity that you have within implementation units. So there is a repository of data that, of course, is highly relevant, but really needs to be maintained and updated as much as possible. But of course, the issue of modeling spatially interacting communities does remain a challenge. A next aspect that has been considered, and I think it's really relevant when it comes to estimate the feasibility of achieving interruption of transmission, is the participation to MDA. So at each round of MDA, there's always a proportion of the population that remains untreated for a variety of reasons. So the question is this proportion a random proportion of the population, or these people that remain untreated are the same across consecutive treatment rounds? Of course, in reality, it's a mixture of these two hypotheses. But the assumption that we make on this really has an impact on the probability of elimination. And there has been some work done. Now here I give an example where it's been shown that the number of NDA rounds needed to achieve elimination of Schistosoma mansoni do really depend drastically on the assumptions that we make on the participation to MDA. So these are the two curves, the dotted curves and the line. And the conclusion that was drawn from this study is that, of course, we need to record individual longitudinal patterns of compliance, though that might be challenging, but we really need that instead of an overall coverage. Next thing we really have to do when it comes to schistosomiasis elimination is to model interventions rather than MDA. Interventions like water sanitation and hygiene interventions, behavioral change, and snail control, as we saw from the previous two presentations, are going to play a crucial role when it comes to achieve the interruption of transmission. And for those interventions, as modeler, we really have to understand and make assumption on how the individual exposure to infection is going to be reduced as an effect of this measure, overall in the population on average, but also what's the variation on the population. And the same thing is about the contribution, the individual contribution to the environment. How much is that going to decrease on average, and how much does it vary on the population? And for those interventions, coverage is of course important. The user uptake of those interventions is another assumption that we'll have to make, and how effective they are is also a parameter that has to be informed in the model. So at Erasmus MSA, we have developed a web app that tries to explore the impact of different interventions, and looking at them, looking at the output from different aspects and different diagnostics that may have been used in context approaching elimination. This is based on a toy version of the model, but the full individual-based model will be integrated into WormSim. I'll leave you now with the set of discussion questions that will be central for the next session. And these are: what are the most important challenges in modeling schistosomiasis elimination? What kind of data are needed to address these challenges? And how can these data be collected for models to better inform control programs? And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I will stop sharing the screen.
Thank you very much, Federica. Can you hear me? That was a great talk, and I think it was also very much understandable for the many field epidemiologists of us, so not only for the modelers, and it's also greatly setting the scene for your discussion with the panelists and the audience later. So big thanks for that, and we are now moving on to our dear Bonnie Webster from the Natural History Museum in London. Again, I think Bonnie is also sharing screen.
Great, thanks, Steffi. Can I check you can see my slides, Steffi?
Yes.
You can, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, and welcome everybody, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody. So I'm going to focus on diagnostics through my talk, and I'm actually going to
we don't hear, huh?
Yeah, you're frozen, Bonnie. We can't hear you and you're frozen. Bonnie, we cannot hear you.
the gaps and priorities.
Now you're back. We couldn't hear the beginning of your talk and you were frozen.
Okay.
Do you want to put your slides back on and restart your talk? Or are you completely gone now?
Oh, she's sharing. There she is.
Very good.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see you, hear you, and also see your slide.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so showing the roadmap for NTDs, it's really clear that showing the diagnostic gaps, and it clearly states that we do have diagnostics, but they need major modifications and they're inadequate to reach those targets. And some of the priorities are to produce standardized and sensitive point of care diagnostics for multiple settings, and also to focus those molecular techniques for xenomonitoring surveillance. So in terms of human diagnostics, we know that throughout a control program, our diagnostic need changes. At the beginning, we need cheap and high throughput diagnostics. And as we move forward into elimination, those diagnostics need to become very sensitive and specific, and also to be used at the point of care. But there's lots of things to think about in terms of that, in terms of cost, infrastructure, and the simplicity of those assays or those diagnostics we need. And it's a really fine balancing out between accuracy, cost, and technical ability needed. And as we know with diagnostics, as our accuracy needs to increase, the costs increase, and the technical ability also increases. Also, with schistosomiasis is a highly complex system. It has a complex life cycle. There's also two forms of disease. We have the intestinal form and the urogenital form. And for that, we need to think about different criteria for our diagnostics. There's also multiple species involved. And we know there's a lot of work going on to develop what we call target product profiles for our diagnostics. And particularly focusing on what those profiles should look for at the elimination settings. There's lots of criteria within that: where our diagnostics going to be used, what kind of sample we're going to use, and the levels of sensitivity and specificity that we need. But also for schistosomiasis, we know that the MDA programs have been highly successful, and people aren't showing those severe symptoms of schistosomiasis anymore. And so we start to see MDA fatigue when we start to do MDA. But also we have run that real risk of resurgence because of the biology of the parasite. Even single people left infected in the community can reinfect that population of snail again and really rapidly lead to resurgence. So this just shows you the diagnostics that we have available currently for schistosomiasis. And they're set into three kind of categories. We have the more basic tests for detecting pathology in eggs. We have the immunological assays, the antibody tests and the antigen tests, and then the more advanced ones with the molecular tests. And those diagnostics have pros and cons for all of them in terms of cost, sensitivity, specificity. So some of them have reached commercialization, but this also takes time. So some of the tests being brought forward now, it takes time to get them validated and commercialized. There's also other diagnostics in the pipeline, particularly antigen-based tests. But both available and new diagnostics need to be advanced in relation to specific areas of those TPPs which are being developed as well. And we know that beginning of control programs, we have high morbidity and we're focusing on control and morbidity control. We have diagnostics that are adequate. We have microscopy and detection of blood and urine, but it's actually the later stages that we need to focus on. CAA and CCA are the antigen-based tests which are coming forward. CCA has been around for a long time, as many people will know. This comes with some caveats at the moment in terms of what happens with those trace results and also cross-reactivity with that test. And then we have the CAA test, which is proving very good for both species and is being developed now into a point of care format. And then we think about the molecular tests, which offer really high sensitivity and specificity, but they're not always easy to implement in the endemic setting. But there are molecular tests which we call isothermal assays, which do offer that point of care testing. And there's lots of research and lots of research steps need to go into those assays to develop them further so they can be used. This is just some data from Zanzibar, which a study that Steffi's been leading. It's the elimination study in Zanzibar. And I've put this up just to show you what happens when we start to compare diagnostics. This is a really important thing. This shows you comparison between egg filtration versus the sensitive CAA test. And you can see that when we start to use those sensitive diagnostics, our prevalences go up quite considerably in many areas. So we need to start thinking about what this tells us and do we actually have elimination in some of these places? So we need better sensitive diagnostic. We also need to think about what the gold standards that we're basing our diagnostic comparisons on as well. And in places like Zanzibar, we're really thinking about what we need those sensitive tests. We need to facilitate that test and treat scenario, and how do we do that, and what tests do we use? And what is the true prevalence, and also where can we find those true transmission hotspots which are keeping transmission going in these countries? So just to move on to the snail side of the talk now. So there's still not much emphasis on snail work. It was very nice to hear Nathan talking about his molluscicide studies, but xenomonitoring, or looking for infections in snails, is very useful for informing on transmission. It'll be a very useful tool for certifying transmission interruption and for future surveillance. But it also allows us to look for snails and the distribution of snails, looking for risk of transmission, and also to enable that targeted snail control that Nathan was talking about. But it's a highly complex system. We know that there's multiple species of schistosome. So the stars here are the African schistosomes there's multiple species of them. And they're very difficult to identify when you're just looking at Cercaria. You need to apply molecular methods to actually identify them. There's also high diversity in terms of the habitats that we need to look at: ponds, lakes, rivers, systems. So you don't have a one-fit-all methodology. You have to apply it to each setting that you're thinking about. And it's a very laborious system as well. You have to collect large numbers of snails, you have to look for infections, you have to do the molecular analysis of those Cercaria coming out. So you need a lot of people involved. And also we know that when we sample snails, the infection prevalence in those snails is always very low, even when you have very high levels of infection in a human population. We can increase our sensitivity in the snails by doing what we call pre-patent snail analysis, looking for infections that might not be mature in our snails, or the parasites that have gone in but will not reach maturity as well. And this increases our sensitivity. It requires a molecular analysis approach after that, but it allows us to screen and identify lots more infections. So this is just showing you some data from Zanzibar on a study that did that. And you can see the levels of infections decrease both at patent and non-patent snails as we reached towards transmission. But in Zanzibar, we were screening almost 10,000 snails, and the patent infections are only 0.1%, where with pre-patent, we get up to nearly 3% of infections there, and we can detect them. And we need to develop better methods of detection in our snails, because it's highly laborious, it's costly, it's technical, and it needs a lot of resources. So we're thinking about pooling strategies for snails and how we better adapt our molecular tools to actually target those infections, identifying them. And again, it's that balancing act between accuracy of our assays and the cost and technical ability needed to actually implement them. And just to finish off talking about environmental detection, so there's a lot of groups now working on detecting Cercaria in the water systems. It requires a molecular approach again. So this is my colleague Fiona Allen working in the WISER project sampling in Tanzania. So taking water samples and trying to identify, detect Cercaria in the water. There's a lot of research steps that need to happen with this, and there's also that diversity that I talked about in terms of habitats and the species that we're looking at as well, which we need to consider. And last slide, so just bring you back to those gaps and priorities from the WHO roadmap. But it's really, we need the funding and the long-term commitment and the clear consensus of what is needed and the targets, and also strong partnerships and connections between research companies that can provide assays and also the organisations doing the implementation. And just to finish off with two questions, which I always come back to, and for discussion in the breakout group. So what is the test and treat strategies that we really need to reach and maintain elimination, and how feasible are they in the field setting? And in terms of the snails, what are important feasible tools for supporting elimination, and how, again, can these be implemented in the elimination programs? And just finish off by thanking my colleagues and my students, Steffi particularly for the Zanzibar work, and also the PHL team, and the Diagnostic group in Leiden, and all the funding that's gone into some of that work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie, for all the work you do, and for presenting us the complexity of diagnosis in elimination settings when intensities get low in humans as well as in snails. So it's a very important topic as well as all the others. So we are now moving, I've seen the chat is quite busy, and I've also seen that some of our speakers were able to respond to questions already, but I would still like to ask David whether there are any questions that we would want to address to the speakers now and to the general audience.
Yes, thank you, Steffi. There's been a lot of activity in the group chat. Everybody's been jumping in with some very good questions, actually, so I think the discussion groups are going to be marvellous. I just want to kick off with Sultani. I'll go through the different speakers, and well done all speakers. Great talks, good summaries of a lot of different work and a lot of different thoughts. For Sultani has been quick in actually responding, but I'd just like to give Sultani a couple of minutes just to say a little bit more about the behavioural change activities that have been implemented, because if you could perhaps just give a little bit more detail, people were asking.
Thank you very much, David. This is a very innovative approach that we are taking, because we realized that behavior change is a major contributor to some of the problems we are having in terms of reaching our objective. So what we are doing now is that we are mainstreaming. The point here is mainstreaming. We are mainstreaming behavior change communication in each and every activity that we are conducting as a strategy. So we are paying a lot of attention to that. And then on top of that, of course, we are now investing in coming up with a very specific health messages, coming up with strategies of being able to reach out better. We are investing in coming up with the new platforms, for example, face-to-face meetings. We are investing in going to media so that we can use radio, television, and even print media much more. We have, and maybe central to the whole strategy is that we have also established a lot of groups and committees which are dealing with these particular components. So we have a specific behavior change communication technical working group, which includes people from the media, people from the Ministry of Education, everybody who can be able to take out the message out there. So we are paying a lot of attention to it as a way of making sure that people get the message. Thank you, David. Within the few minutes that I have, maybe that's what I can say.
Thanks, Sultani. And before I let you go, I just, it's a question that you did answer, but it would be, I think it would be of value to say something about it to the general audience who might have missed that. And that's the question of how were you able to navigate the need for more drugs to the community? And so I think what we're thinking now is, how are we going to actually reach the adult communities that need treatment?
So David, the good news is that for our breaking transmission strategy, we have done a lot of, advocacy work. We have engaged with a lot of different stakeholders. For us, we are not going for just one option. I think one of the things that lots of programs have done is to over-rely on the WHO donation. So for us, yes, we are benefiting from the WHO donation, which is coordinated by WHO from the various manufacturers. But over and above that, we have directly engaged the manufacturers. We have actually worked with some of our partners so that we can procure directly. And as we speak, the good news is that tentatively, we have been able to mobilize commitments for all the quantities that we need, at least for the first phase. The first phase, which is expanding to about 90 sub-counties. So we are happy to say that we are just waiting for everything to clear up in terms of the COVID infection. And hopefully at the end of this year, we will be able to do the whole population so that we can now be able to achieve the coverage objective. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Sultani, and that's great news. Over to you, Nathan, if I may. An interesting question in relation to use of niclosamide, because in fact, we're all a little bit concerned about the environmental impact of niclosamide and its impact on fish and other populations. So the question is, how did you manage to agree with the environmental agencies and those concerned with fishing when planning to spray in rivers and other water bodies where fish are present?
Okay. Thank you, Professor David. For this question, when we go to the field before applying the molycoside, we meet the villagers, and those who have, for example, some fish pond, we ask them to close all mechanism for water flows to their pond. And when after applying the molycoside, we had to evaluate the impact on other organisms. For this purpose, we collaborate with the laboratory of hydrobiology at the university. We have a colleague who evaluated the impact of the niclosamide on phytoplankton and zooplankton and other fishes. And the result was that after some time after the application of niclosamide, the site recovered with the organism. So the impact of niclosamide on the environment is not is not nocive, I can say.
Thanks, Nathan. It's good to hear that it was possible to do that environmental survey, and I hope that does encourage others to look into this as a possibility for snail control. Federica, just to pass to you quickly, I'm conscious of time, but you've actually got one coming in from the diagnostic side. And that really asks the question is in relation to, for modeling, what's going to be the impact of the more sensitive diagnostics that gives a higher prevalence? How are you going to deal with that?
Oh, yes, David, thanks for the question. So I think that, well, the remapping of schistosomiasis using POC-CCA has already shown that actually the prevalence was much higher than previously thought, right? In a lot of different areas, and this, of course, is only related to schistosomiasis. But at the moment, we are doing some work with Leiden University Medical Center colleagues, Robert van Dam and Lisette, we are actually looking at how the CAA relates to the prevalence that you will get if you just use parasitological tools or the conventional tools. And that has the advantage of actually including other species, not only Mansonii, but there is still a lot to understand when it comes to tests that are based on CAA. But there is quite a lot that we can do, because CAA tests based on CAA can actually be a proxy for worm burden rather than actually prevalence of infections. So they have a lot of flexibility to be used, for example, with pooling strategies. And this is something that we're going to explore. And I think, of course, for settings that are approaching elimination, it's really, really important to be able to pick up as much as infection as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Federica. It's actually answered the other question as well about what does it mean if CA is positive and people are egg negative. And I think as you move forward with those pooling strategies and others as well, that's going to be so important. And then very quickly to Bonnie, I think this will probably come up in your diagnostic breakout group, but there is a question: what do you think about the use of portable smartphone-based diagnostic devices for schistosomiasis testing and treating strategies?
Yeah, well, I think we have to embrace all the modern technology, and I think they'll be highly useful. I think the key for schistosomiasis is to get a diagnostic quickly and to be able to treat those people very quickly. So if we can use those kind of on-the-ground technologies to report, particularly, I think that's going to really help us move forward. And just to point out that things like the COVID situation, the diagnostic technology is moving forward so rapidly. And I think we can capitalize on some of those really quick advancements to actually use those to focus on some of our diseases as well.
Thanks, Bonnie. And just to flag, there was a comment about the TPPs which you mentioned. It was questioned as to whether the TPPs were asked. The question was whether the TPPs were available from the WHO DTEC subgroup. And the answer to that is that watch this space, as they should be ready within the month. So with that, over to you, Steffi.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very good news when we're coming towards the end of the first block of the session. And we will now immediately move to the second part of the session with a slight delay only, and that is the breakout sessions. So in a minute, Chelsea will randomly allocate you, the general audience, to one of three sessions. The chairs and the panelists that were assigned before, they will be able to verbally contribute, and the general audience will be able to contribute again by chat, and as I said before, by finally voting for 2 operational research questions. How this will be done in detail, you will experience in your breakout rooms. It's the first time we're doing this. I hope it's going well. Yeah, have fun, and over to Matt and Chelsea now and putting us to different rooms. And then good luck. All the 3 groups hopefully had a very hot and fruitful discussions, at least ours from the modelers had. I think since time is running and we want to hear what happened in the individual groups, I would like to ask probably Sultani from group 1, focusing on interventions, to briefly present what was discussed in your group. Sultani, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Steffi. I think for us, we had very rich discussions and a group of very well informed panelists who gave us a lot of questions. I know that Nora was doing the rapporteuring for us and picking out some of the questions. So probably she would be in a much better place to just run us through some of those.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I have as people are voting, you can see the share screen. So it was really of about how can we engage the public and what is needed for creating demand and prioritization and long-term commitment for schistosomiasis entities in terms of political leadership and country ownership. This question has been raised by a few panelists. And another key message or key question was also what are, these are kind of, sorry, something is being lost. But what surveys and protocols and diagnostic tools are necessary to monitor and identify and validate actually stages in elimination. From behavior change, there is also the question as how can we make behavior change interventions more efficient and effective? And maybe Sultani, you can continue.
Okay, so I think at that point we have our votes that have come in, and as you can see, quite a number of the group members really liked the question on what are the optimal packages of micro-interventions required to achieve interruption of transmission in different schistosomiasis archetypes, and at what intervention unit should they be targeted. So I think that was the most popular, closely followed by how can we create demand for elimination and incentivize the local population to join the schistosomiasis elimination effort so that it can become an activity that is pursued with instead of for the endemic community. So I think in a nutshell, that's what we were able to come with. Back to you, Steffi. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great, Sultani. Great, Nathan. Thanks, Nora, for taking excellent notes. I think that's really giving a very good picture about what was discussed in the intervention groups and also prioritized in terms of operational research. With this, I would hand over to the modeling group, Federica and Jessica.
Ah, look at that. You've already shared it. Brilliant. So in the modeling group, there were three kind of main topics that came up, mostly to do with heterogeneities, both at like the individual level and the spatial level, and also what kind of how we manage or model like what will happen kind of after we've achieved these public health goals. And then also finally, is it actually possible to eliminate transmission without a real commitment to other strategies? And we discussed WASH quite a lot. And we can see that the top two questions really that got most of our votes are what are the MDA and public health strategies after achieving these public health goals? And is it possible to eliminate transmission of schistosomiasis with drug distribution only? So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the modeling group. Very much on time, also in the group. So, and a very brief and concise feedback. And now we would hand over to the diagnostics group. I see a lot of writing in there coming up. So Fiona and Bonnie, please, floor is yours.
So I think Fiona is just going to start off and go through the main points that we covered as well. Thank you, Fiona.
Sorry, I went slightly more over the top on, sorry, I can also hear Bonnie's computer. I went more over the top on the writing. I think some of the things the interesting things that were covered are some of the things that were brought up in the original questions in the chat. So a lot of things is linking with the other sections, obviously, which is why we have this this whole discussion group on MDA and modelling as well, but also questions of what age people could treat as one strategy, or what age should we be testing, and how important is it at which stage in elimination or control are we looking for eggs, or are we looking for positives in antibodies, so for younger children, etc. So they were the sort of main points from the questions here, you can see who's really contributing, and a treatment history which leads into things that Poppy and Amadou were saying about how we evolve with the treatment as well. So they're probably the major points. Sorry, I wrote way too much to fit on one screen. Bonnie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think that's correct. So I think a lot of what we discussed as well is all related to what egg negatives versus egg positives as well. And so when you pick out egg negatives, are they really contributing to transmission? And how do you know that those people are contributing to transmission, particularly after MDA and scenarios like that?
I think, yeah, the other important point was that Ron brought up, as did...
Oh, Fiona's frozen.
Yeah, Fiona's lost.
Yeah, we've lost Fiona. We also heard from, just to carry on, that Evan updated us on the TTPs again, and that they will be announced very soon. And we had some comments on the antibody tests, and also about how they're going to be very useful in the future in terms of looking for exposure again once we've gone past elimination. Fiona, you're back. If you would like to, do you want to comment on, you were going to comment on Ron's?
I would. Yeah, no, I thought I had. It was pretty much just what you said, that Sarah, Anna, Evan, Ron in particular brought up quantitative diagnostics and when that was appropriate, and at what point do we just need a yes/no test, and again specificity and sensitivity on how you define that with eggs, with antibodies, antigens, etc.
Excellent. Yeah, very much. Big thank you to all the rapporteurs, chairs, and the panelists. I think we are very good in time, and I would now wonder whether David wants to already go ahead with the closing words, or I think I've heard Anouk's voice somewhere. If she wants to briefly explain us, how this session might then feed into a synthesized session. Is Anouk with us? She might not.
I've got that slide, Steffi, which will show that.
Yeah. So I hope you can see my slide now. And with this, I would then hand over to David.
Thanks, Steffi. What a great session, really. I think we've come out with a number of fascinating questions. We've got 6 top questions there from the different groups, and that's going to give us an opportunity to digest and to consider as we move forward with the other pre-meeting sessions. I also note that Darren has slipped in quite a timely question when he's asking, when is the optimal time to move from control to elimination of transmission? I think that's something we've all got to consider, and hopefully that's something that will come forward in our next sessions. And just to run through those for you, they're up on the screen. The next one's at the end of the month and has been led by Upendo, and there we're really trying to get an insight from different countries, particularly Tanzania, Malawi, and Ethiopia, I think, looking at experiences on reaching the elimination goal, which in this case, elimination of schistosomiasis morbidity, and really what do you do next? What do you do next when you've actually reached that situation where you've eliminated morbidity, and can you actually say you've eliminated morbidity? So stay with us for that, and we'll certainly bring some of this discussion back to that particular session. Also, we then move on just before the deadline, the 12th of October, that's the CORE NTD deadline, a provisional date at the moment, but this session is going to be led by Fiona and others, looking at decision-making in schistosomiasis, and it's really going to get drilled down into the details of developing the M&E framework. So I think all these three sessions are going to tie together, and the great opportunity is to bring the key questions that have been generated in these different sessions, and the thinking and the discussions and the ideas into the core NTD, into the main session, which we call the synthesized session, where we'll actually we'll have a working title there of developing an M&E framework for schistosomiasis and prioritizing operational research to achieve schistosomiasis elimination. So hopefully at the end of that, in November, we will have a good idea of what the community, what we would like to do in terms of operational research to actually start us going more swiftly down this road to schistosomiasis elimination. Now, this is the kind of time where we'd all break up and go for a coffee and then have some really good detailed discussions about what's been discussed and get down to the nitty-gritty of it all, or even off for a nice cold beer. But we're not able to do that. But please do keep thinking about these ideas. And if you have got further feedback that you want to make, then do send it on through the Global Schistosomiasis Alliance site, and we can then incorporate it. There's lots of interesting chat now going on as well. I don't think we've really got time to refer back to that. And I think all that remains for me to do is to thank everybody who's participated. Thank you all for joining us today. A huge thank you to our speakers, our rapporteurs, and the panelists. It's been a bit of a rush, I know, in the breakout rooms. We perhaps could have had more time in there. There's so much to discuss. But also a very special thank you to Steffi and Chelsea, and also to Anouk from GSA, who might have only just joined at the tail end today, for ensuring that the meeting ran so smoothly. And it's clear, once we get all these schistosomiasis people together in one room, there's a lot of interesting discussion. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Again, I can only repeat a big thanks to Chelsea and also Matt from Core NTD. And the biggest thanks is going to our chairs and rapporteurs and panelists. And of course, to everybody who joined this meeting. I think it has been a wonderful session. I think we set the scene for the next session. So we are looking forward to Upendo and Fiona's, and then to finally attending Core NTD in November. So big thanks from my end. Don't know if Chelsea still wants to add something. Otherwise, totally in time. Big thanks, and have a great afternoon, evening, day, whatever is coming up for you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to echo Upendo in the chat that, Steffi, you've really set the bar very high for the next series of pre-meetings. Congratulations to the GSA on being the very first to have a Core NTD pre-meeting. I hope everyone who participated agrees that this is a huge success and something we will definitely look forward to in the future. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks, Chelsea.
For me, it's wonderful to see so many friends.
Thank you. And a goodbye to all.
Yeah, thanks for your attention. Thanks for participation.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.